Hi, I'm Sarah Short, your host of the No Way But Through podcast. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all things mom. How to parent through those exhausting days with your little ones, how to be intentional and connected with your big kids, and how to embrace what truly matters and let go of the rest. From life with a newborn to toddlers to teenagers and everything in between, I'll teach you foundational and practical strategies on how to walk through every season of motherhood with courage and creativity, all while prioritizing your relationships with your kids in a home life where all of you can thrive. My Nana once told me, there's no way but through. Turns out she was right, in life and in motherhood. So come along with me as we become better moms together. This is the No Way But Through podcast. Hey y'all, welcome back into the No Way But Through podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Short, and I'm so glad to be here with you today as we launch the first full episode in the new series, How We Talk with Our Kids About Real Life Stuff. I loved getting your feedback this past week when I announced that this would be what we're going to talk about this season on the podcast. I know so many of you feel the way that I felt when I had younger kids and that I still feel today. And that's that how we talk with our kids about important things is really important. Like, we all care about this. We want our conversations to be meaningful. We want our conversations to be impactful, and we want to be able to use our words well with our kids to help guide them and teach them and disciple them. Because as we talked about last week, if we aren't discipling our kids, somebody else will. It'll be their friends, it'll be the TV or their phones or social media or the media. And so we carry a great responsibility as parents to disciple our kids. I also talked with you last week about the posture that we use when we're going into conversations with our kids. I talked about how when Jason and I go into conversations with our kids, that what we want is for it to be a conversation with our kids, that we aren't talking to them, we aren't talking at them, but we want to talk with our kids. And I was really intentional about the way that I titled this series, How We Talk with Our Kids About Real Life Stuff. Because y'all, little kids don't want to be talked at. Elementary kids don't want to be talked at. And I can tell you with certainty that teenagers and adult kids, they do not want to be talked at. But a conversation, which everybody's participating in, where dialogue is welcome, if you approach your conversations with your kids this way, I think that you'll find that they'll be much more receptive and that your wisdom and your guidance will be far more impactful on their hearts because they will be much more open to listen. So today, I'm going to share with you how we talk with our kids about a big mess up. If you are one of the younger parents that listens to this podcast, I do not want you to tune out because everything that I'm going to share with you today will be applicable to you now or later, and it will only become more applicable to you as your kids grow up. But if you can begin to think about these things and approach conversations with your kids when they've made a really big mistake, if you can begin to approach it this way, it will become easier for you as they get older when the stakes are higher because you will have been doing this throughout their entire lives. And if you are like me and you have teenagers or adult kids, young adult kids, you will have likely already encountered one of their really big mistakes. And maybe you're listening to this wondering what I might say and if you've blown it, or if there might be a way to go about things differently moving forward. And I just want to really encourage you that it is never too late to begin to shift and change the way you talk with your kids about anything. Even if your kids are already young adults or you have older teenagers and young adults and you feel like you haven't done this well. There's no better time to start than now. Hopefully, you will have opportunity to have many more conversations with them about things and maybe even some big mistakes that they'll continue to make. So I hope that what I share with you today, it will be encouraging to you, and there will be things that you can pull from as you move forward in relationship with your older teens or your young adult kids. One of the things that I tell my kids often about being in a family, one of the gifts about being in a family and having parents that really love them, is that they get a bunch of years living in our house where they get to mess up and we are here for them. And that there may come a time in their lives when they've moved out and they've moved on. There likely will come that time in their lives, and we won't be living with them, and we won't be right here and available and ready to help them like we are now. And as their parents, we want to do all we can now to help guide them and equip them and to help them learn from their mistakes while they're living in our house so that when they no longer live here, they have tools and ways of thinking and ways of acting that will help them be able to move forward after they've messed up really badly in some way. Your kids, y'all, listen, your kids have the gift of you. I said this last week, but there is no substitute for you. And you have such an incredible opportunity while they are living at home with you to help teach them and model for them what it looks like to move forward past a big mistake. So, what do? One of our kids has messed up really badly. If they're 3 years old, a big mistake might look like they threw a toy car at their brother, it hit him in the head, and he's now on his way to the emergency room and has to get stitches across his forehead because he's cut and bleeding. That's a pretty big mistake for a 3-year-old. If they're 16, maybe they have sent something inappropriate via text or online that's gotten exposed, and now they are dealing with the fallout of that decision. That's a pretty devastating mistake for a 16-year-old. So, what do we do as parents? How do we talk with them? How do we teach them in these moments? How do we have conversations over the course of the years that we have with them that will begin to really plant good seeds of truth as they make mistakes? And they will over and over. How do we help them believe what's true about them and what's true about God? Today, I'm going to share with you 3 things to think about and to begin to incorporate into the conversations you're having with your kids when they mess up big. These are things that you can begin to share with your little ones as you're talking with them about big mistakes. And these are things that are timeless and true that you can begin to share with your teenagers or your young adult kids when they mess up, because these things point to a timeless and true God. So you are now sitting with one of your kids who's really messed up. What can you say? How can you talk with them? Let's get into it. Number 1, nothing will ever separate you from God's love. When you are walking with Christ, you are forever His, and He will never turn His back on you. He turned His back on His Son Jesus so that He never has to turn His back on you. You are never defined by your biggest mistake, including this one that you've just made. And you are not the sum of your biggest mistakes either. All of them put together are not enough to make God turn His back on you. Jesus' righteousness is enough. You are always going to sin and you are always going to struggle, but it is what you do with that sin and struggle that will end up defining your life. When you put your hope and your faith in Christ, He has already paid for it. So you can leave it at the cross where it belongs and you can move forward. As parents, you are speaking these words to your kids, these timeless truths about God, about His love, about His Son Jesus, about what was accomplished for us on the cross. We need to repeat this over and over and over again throughout our kids' entire lives. Our biggest mistakes are why we need the cross. Our biggest mistakes are why we needed Jesus to come and why God sent Him to rescue us. God's forever love is our reward. It is our kids' gift when they put their trust in Jesus Christ. God's never stopping, never giving up, always and forever love, as Sally Lloyd Jones puts it in the Jesus Storybook Bible, is our kids' gift and treasure. And you have an opportunity when you are sitting in front of your kids who have just royally messed up to help communicate that to them. Stephen Curtis Chapman, he became quite famous in the 1980s for his Christian music. He wrote some very popular music, and he and his wife, they adopted a couple of girls from China. Well, one day, their biological son, one of their older sons, his name is Will Franklin, he was backing out of their driveway, and he did not see his 5-year-old sister, Maria, playing in the driveway, and he backed over her. Of course, it was shock and horror for him and their entire family as they came running out to see Maria's lifeless body in the driveway. And as the ambulance came to rush Maria off to the hospital, where she eventually died from her injuries, Stephen Curtis Chapman tells the story of looking back at his son, Will Franklin, who had begun to run away. And he said, "Will Franklin, your father loves you." And he goes on to talk about what he wanted to communicate to his son in that moment. He wanted to communicate not only his love for his son after his son had just made the biggest mistake of his life, but he also wanted to communicate to his son, and maybe even more importantly, to Will Franklin, that his Father in heaven loved him still. When you are sitting in front of your child who has just made a huge mistake, you have a tremendous opportunity to communicate to them that God's love remains theirs, that nothing will ever separate them from God's love, that Scripture is so clear on that, and we get to cling to that as Christ followers, and that they get to cling to that in this very moment. You get to be the mouthpiece of God to your child when the enemy would hand them guilt and confusion and despair. You get to be truth to them and help them understand that nothing will ever separate them from God's love, including this mistake. Your 3-year-old can hear this. Your 5-year-old can hear this. Your 12-year-old can hear this. And y'all, no one needs to hear this more than a teenager who has just made a huge mistake. Number 2, while your mistakes will never cost you your relationship with God, they will sometimes cost you your friendships and other relationships that you value. While God will never turn his back on you, he never promises that you won't have consequences for your sin. You may lose friendships. Later on in life, a big mistake can cost you your marriage. A mistake or a pattern of mistakes can land you in jail. Your sin has consequences, and oftentimes the consequences are far greater than your parents being mad at you or you getting grounded or suffering some kind of consequence from us right now. Y'all, it is really important for our kids to understand that. There are earthly consequences for our sin. Sometimes we can do something about those consequences by the way we handle ourselves, and there are other times, y'all, when there is nothing we can do. Our mistake has broken a relationship, and we don't get to choose to stay in that friendship because the other person has cut us off. If you are of an age that you are able to listen to a podcast, then you have likely had this happen to you at some point in your life. Something you did, a mistake that you made, has cost you a friendship. And I think that it's really important that we be honest about that with our kids. Sometimes our mistakes cost us friendships or other relationships that we value. But is there anything we can do? One of the things that Jason and I talk with our kids about when we're in the midst of this kind of conversation is, how can you make it right? How do you apologize in this situation? What might that look like today, right now, here in this situation? How do you show someone who is sitting in the consequences of your sin? How do you show them that you're deeply sad and sorry? What does that look like? Is it a note? Is it a phone call? How do you ask for forgiveness without demanding it? All of these are questions. They're ways that we talk with our kids when they're in front of us after making a really big mistake. Several years ago, I was sitting in front of one of my kids who had just really messed up. He had made a terrible mistake. He had gossiped, and when I say gossiped, he had been brutally unkind about someone. Well, like gossip often does, it got out, and the person that he had been talking to shared the information with the girl that he was gossiping about and with a bunch of others as well. He had been confronted about it, and people were pretty upset with him, understandably. I was sitting with him in our family room, asking him those questions. How do you ask for forgiveness here? How do you make it right? Do you call her? Does this really seem appropriate to handle on text, or do you need to do something more? He sat in the family room, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up some dishes, and he came over to me and said, "Hey, Mom, can we go to her house so I can apologize to her?" I remember grabbing my keys and both of us getting in the car and driving to her house, which was, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes away. And both of us just kind of rode in silence. Him sitting with guilt and shame and embarrassment. And I would say he felt equal parts wanting to go do this and equal parts wanting to run away and just not deal with it at all. Well, we pulled up to her house and she was waiting in the driveway. Her mom had told her that he was coming. I'd texted her mom, and he and this girl, they took a walk down the street, and he was able to apologize to her in person and ask for forgiveness. She accepted his apology, and I'm happy to report that many years later, they are friends. But frankly, that is ultimately not what matters here as it relates to what I want to communicate to y'all. We can be tempted as parents when something like this happens to get angry with our kids, to ream them out, to demand explanations as to why you did that. Don't you know better? For us to be embarrassed ourselves, especially if it involves someone we know, like one of our friends and the kids of one of our friends. Quite frankly, y'all, that's how I grew up. My mistakes yielded a lot of yelling from my mom, a lot of shame, and I often felt like I did not know how to move forward. We get to do this differently. How do we talk with our kids about a big mess up? Well, we show them the path forward. We help them think through how to apologize well, how to ask for forgiveness well, how to get in a car and drive to a girl's house and knock on the door and say, "I am sorry for hurting you. I'm sorry for using my words to harm you. I was wrong." Y'all, we can do this with our children from the time they are 3 years old, all the way through until they leave home. And I mean, all the way through their college years, even when they're popping back in and out of home. Because, y'all, we want to send adults into the world that know how to ask for forgiveness, that know how to move forward past mistakes in a godly way that honors God and that honors other people and that plants them firmly in God's grace, in the conviction of the Holy Spirit, and with the hope that they will remain firm and secure in God's love. That's what I was talking about last week when I said we want our kids to leave conversations with us feeling safe and hopeful. Safe and hopeful. Y'all, aren't these the kind of husbands and wives that we want our kids to be when they leave our house and they are looking for a partner and to get married? Think about your own marriage or the marriages that you have inside access to, your close girlfriends, your sisters, your parents' marriage. The best marriages are between people who know how to ask for forgiveness and how to grant it. Y'all, those are the kind of adults that I want leaving my home. And that leads me to number 3. Something I love to remind my kids of because I need to be reminded of it too, and that's this. Our biggest mistakes are often the catalyst for our best growth. Why? Because our biggest mistakes expose our idols, our mistakes and their consequences, if we are willing to learn from them, are opportunities for growth because we get to look at ourselves, look at our choices, examine our patterns and the areas of our lives where we are not allowing God to be God. When we gossip about someone and that gets out, and we are at risk of losing that friendship, What gets exposed is that we are not secure in our relationship with God, but instead want people to think more of us. And so we tear people down with our words. That's what gossip does. If our young child steals a candy bar from the checkout line at Target, it exposes an idol. Pleasure, comfort, I want what I want. I don't want to pay for it. I don't want to play by the rules. Pleasure and comfort, what I want is first. If our teenager sends something inappropriate via text message or is addicted to pornography and continues in that pattern, what's laid out there before us is idolatry, where they are prioritizing and worshiping a created thing, sex, power, money. They are worshiping another person instead of worshiping God. One of the opportunities that we have when our kids make mistakes, like especially the really big ones, is that it exposes their idols, and we get to point that out to them. That while they're under our roof, while they're home with us, we begin to see what they're drawn to, what their idols are, what they worship, what things are so important to them that they're willing to sin to get them. We get a view and a window into our kids. And in that way, we get to help them see that and begin to root out those idols. My oldest son, Jack, one of his favorite verses is Jonah 2:8. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. Going back to the very first thing I shared with you here, when we're talking with our kids about a big mistake, the first thing I told you to share with them is that nothing can separate them from God's love. But what our idols do, our idols, they pull our hearts away from Him. And when our kids make a big mistake that exposes an idol in their lives, we get to help them grow and learn from that, to turn away from those things, the idols that their hearts are drawn to. Their biggest mistake then becomes a catalyst for their growth. I mean, the cliche of all cliches is, I learned from my mistakes, right? We do. We learn from them. They are great teachers. No one teaches us better than our mistakes. And as parents, we're able to talk with our kids and help them to see, hey, I know you made this mistake. I know that it has consequences, but here's what I want you to see. You're trying to please man instead of pleasing God. You want people to think better of you, and so you talked down about someone, you gossiped about them, when you already have God's approval and His love. You don't need to gossip about somebody else. You don't need to put somebody else down to build yourself up. You already have full acceptance in Christ. Y'all, this is stuff you can begin to say and communicate to your young elementary kids, to your middle school kids, to your teens, all the way up through your adult kids. Y'all, our little ones are capable of understanding so much more than we think they are. And y'all, if you continue to reinforce this throughout your kids' lives, y'all, it will take root. So, 3 things to think about when you're talking with your kids about a big mess up. Number 1, nothing will ever separate you from God's love if you have given your life to Christ. It is yours forever. His love and acceptance is yours forever. Number 2, while your mistakes will never cost you God's love, they may cost you a friendship or other relationships that you care about. So, how do you ask for forgiveness? How do you embrace humility and apologize? You may not save the friendship, but you honor God when you apologize well and when you own your mistakes. And number 3, our biggest mistakes are often the catalysts for our best growth. Our mistakes reveal our idols, and if we can begin to wrestle with our idols and root them out of our hearts and bring them to the light where God can do His best work, then we can begin to move forward through life, having turned away from those idols and turned towards the love of God for us. And as parents, we have such an opportunity to help our kids do that and understand that. So often, their idols reveal themselves when they're very little. Isn't that true, y'all? Your little kids' idols, can't you see them already? I see you all shaking your head yes, because we can see their idols and what they might struggle with even later on in life when they are really young. Before I close out today, I want to share this with you. I have talked with all of my kids about what I was going to podcast about this season, how we talk with them about real life stuff around here. And I have older kids now, and so we can have these kind of conversations about what mom's doing or dad's doing with our work. And so I was riding in the car with my son, Whit, and I said, "Hey, bud, I'm podcasting this fall about the conversations that we have about real life stuff." And he shook his head yes. And I said, "Well, the first episode that I'm going to share with them is about how we talk with you about a big mess up." Well, he looked over at me and he said, "Oh, Mom, that's really good. I think you could probably help a lot of people with that." My kids are my best cheerleaders. I tell you all that all the time. Anyway, so I said, "Hey, Whit, could you share with me what you remember, anything you remember about conversations that Dad and I have had with you about a big mess up?" Well, he looked over at me, thought for a minute, and he said, "Choose love, not resentment. Choose love, not resentment." And I said, "Tell me more about that." And he said, "Well, you say choose love, not resentment. Don't let it be a big block to your relationship. Forgive." And I realized that what he was talking about was how to respond when someone else has messed up big towards him. And that what Jason and I say to our kids when they've been on the receiving end of something really painful, some kind of betrayal, someone's harmful words, them being left out of something, someone else's mess up landing on them and their hearts, and all of the things that Jason and I say to them in those moments, what he remembers is us saying, choose love, not resentment. Don't let this be a big block to your relationship. Forgive. I wasn't going to talk about that in this podcast, but it's so important. And so I'm going to take the lead from Whit here and say that while this podcast is about when your kids make a big mistake, and I've shared with you some of the phrasing and the posture and the words around how we work through that with our kids, at the same time, your child is going to get hurt too. They are going to be on the receiving end of somebody else's really big mistake. And y'all, we get to raise good forgivers. Forgivers who don't choose resentment, but choose love. The kind of love that Christ extends to us that is undeserved, but powerful and life-giving. As important as it is to me that my kids know how to own their mistakes, how to ask for forgiveness, how to make a way forward when they've messed up, y'all, it is just as important to me that I send out into this broken world adults who know how to forgive other people because they know how much they've been forgiven. It is both. And you have such an opportunity over and over and over again over the course of 18 plus years to help coach and guide and teach your kids to have these conversations with them when they've made a huge mistake and they need to know that God loves them. They need to know that sometimes the consequences might cost them a relationship or someone that's really important to them, but that there's so much opportunity for growth. But on the flip side, when they are on the receiving end of someone else's mistake, that they can choose to love and forgive and to not choose resentment. Wouldn't that be something? If you send out into the world your adult kids who not only know how to ask for forgiveness when they've really messed up, but are really good at extending it as well. Y'all, that's it for this episode, the first one in our series on how we talk with our kids about big life stuff. I can't wait for next time. So grateful for all of you. See y'all next time on the No Way But Through podcast. You've just listened to another episode of the No Way But Through podcast. If you want to connect with other like-minded moms and join our growing online community, head on over to Instagram and follow along with us at No Way But Through. You can always reach me over there throughout the week. And if you'd like to financially support this podcast, there's a link at the bottom of every episode where you can do just that.